realize it's probably too late to make the change. But he seems in Christ's name.
Go ahead and turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 29. Genesis 29. So, we are continuing our series entitled What is Faith? And looking at the biblical notion of faith and its definition, and looking at stories through Hebrews chapter 11. And last week we started looking at the next person from Hebrews, which was Jacob. We learned that Jacob is a good example of a man who finished strong despite a bad start. The bad start was caused by himself and his choices. And we looked at how he transitioned in his own life from a person who was slothful, deceitful, and entitled to a man who provided for himself and for others, took on the mantle of responsibility and work. We learned that God in turn blessed Jacob's work after Jacob began to see the value in doing things for himself and for others, instead of expecting others to do for him and to give to him. We read in Genesis 25 how Jacob appears to have been favored by his mother, left at home with her while Isaac and Esau worked outside in the farms and fields. And we discussed how it might make sense that Isaac would favor Esau, even if it's not biblically a good idea. We can understand Isaac's motivation for it because the Bible tells us that his smell reminded Isaac of a field that God had blessed. We looked at Isaac's life a little more in depth and saw how God had blessed him and the work of his hands, that Isaac had not been sitting at home all day while God simply made the fields give forth abundantly. Rather, first, Isaac worked with his men in the fields, and God blessed the fields to give forth abundantly. We learned that God did the same with the wells that they dug as well. While others sat around and bemoaned the lack of water, Isaac and his men were digging wells, and then God blessed those wells to provide water to those in need. We discussed how this pattern was shown even in the feeding of the 5,000, that Christ did not simply make manna appear, but rather he took what was brought to him and multiplied it. And even when God fed the children of Israel in the wilderness and did bring manna, he still required them to go out and gather it. It did not simply appear in their cabinets and cupboards. We learned that even in one of Jacob's most transformative portions of his life, his famous prayer to the Lord in Genesis 28 at Bethel, Jacob is still entitled, saying, "If God will give me bread, if God will give me raiment, and if God will bring me in peace to my father's house, then God will be my God." He does not say, "If God will bless the work of my hands," nor does he say, "If God will turn the heart of my brother to accept my humble apology." Instead, what he asks of God is that God would just give him these things and make all this stuff right. We learn that all this shows us that Jacob's beginning was not one of faith, but eventually Jacob is confronted with something he wants that he cannot lie for, he cannot trick, deceive, or steal his way into possessing. And that thing is Rachel. We read in Genesis 29 how Jacob's life begins to change when Jacob accepts the mantle of manhood and responsibility and begins to provide for others instead of demanding that others provide for him. And we were challenged to be the sort of Christian who understood the importance of constantly growing and changing in our lives, never accepting that who we are today is who we will be for the rest of our lives. And to focus on the end of our lives, finishing strong, not being held back by the limitations of right now, but seeing ourselves as God sees us, imperfect, but constantly able to grow and change and improve. Now, if we looked at Jacob's life in sort of like a graph or whatnot, we might say that Jacob's life starts one way and then, he reaches sort of a dip in his character and whatnot. And then he reaches a place in his life where he begins to make adjustments and his life improves dramatically. And so where we left off last week really was sort of at the bottom of that dip. It is at the place at which Jacob is probably the most, or I should say the least well respected in Scripture. And there's not much good that is really said about Jacob in the sense of him, prior to some of his transformations in his life. The point of all that is this, and that is that no matter where we are in our life, as long as we are here, God has something for us. God has something for us, either something for us to do, someone for us to reach, someone for us to make an impact for. There is never a place in our life while we are on this soil that God is done with us. No matter what our physical state, no matter what our mental state, our capacity, if we are saved and here, God has a plan for us. And there is something that can be done. It is for each Christian to figure out what that thing is. We talked about even during announcements, we talked about Backyard Bible Club. And I stand firmly on this. I think Backyard Bible Club is a wonderful ministry. Do I always enjoy it? No. Sometimes it's really hot. Sometimes it's really frustrating. It's tiring. You know, it's tough to go like to work, then straight to the place. You know, to the I don't know what you call it, the playground or site. Thank you. Yeah, words. You think I'd be good with words at this point? I've done this, but you know. Everybody can do something, but the truth is that that's not true in the same sense, right? Not everybody has the same physical capacities, and that's fine.
That's true. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I remember like years ago when we first started doing flyer distribution. You know, I'd see Don Kaler out there doing flyers. With all the problems that Don had with his back and things, he'd be doing flyers. Don doesn't do flyers as much anymore, but you know what he does do? He prays a lot, right? You see, it's not figuring out what everybody else is doing. It's actually just figuring out what does God want us to do.
That's right.
Yep.
That's it. And as long as we're here, God has something for us to do. And Jacob had things that he could be doing. He had potential that he was not living up to. And that is the problem in Jacob's life. It is not that Jacob wasn't what Abraham could be, or that Jacob wasn't what Isaac could be. It was that Jacob wasn't who Jacob could be. And that is how God deals with each of us. It's not comparing each of us to one another, but rather comparing ourselves to what God would have us to be. And so picking up where we left off last week, we're going to see that not only is Jacob faced with all of this stuff, but we also see in Genesis 29 that Jacob is humbled by reaping some of the deception that he had sown in his own life. And we'll see in verse number 21, and Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast, and it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah his maid for an handmaid. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Did I not serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? Now understand, if you really think about it, what Jacob says to Laban here is exactly the argument that Esau could have made about his thing. Esau is the one who had helped Isaac build an empire with his sweat and hard work and whatnot. And in truth, if we look at it from a worldly perspective, we could say Esau was rightfully entitled to what he had worked to help earn for his father. And what did Jacob do? Jacob tricked his father into giving it away. Now here, Jacob is faced with the same thing. Jacob works for something, and what he gets is not what he worked for. The same is true with Esau. And so Jacob tastes a bit of what he has done. This is something that is true for most Christians as well. It is an important learning opportunity for us to face the consequences of the things and the decisions that we have made. It's a difficult and a challenging prospect. Most of us, all of humankind, we constantly look for one excuse after another for why we are in the situation that we are in. And usually us or our choices is at the very bottom of that list. After every other single possible excuse could be given, we finally just face, okay, I'm in this mess because of something I've done.
It's true.
Very few of us start there, saying, okay, maybe this is because of something I've done. Very few of us start there. We have to get through and mark off all the other excuses before it comes to pass that we accept responsibility for ourselves. Jacob here is faced with that same thing. Not only that, though, Jacob begins to learn the importance of not taking things from others that have been given, but instead earning what is his by his own labor. Now, I want to remind you, when we talked about this last week, something that really came to mind when you think about like the story of Isaac, how Isaac goes and does all this work, right? I mean, there was a famine everywhere. And so presumably everybody was trying to feed themselves. Right? I mean, when you're faced with a famine, very few people just sit around. I mean, that'd be the height of irresponsibility and negligence when there's a famine going on. Everybody's got to chip in. But it's Isaac's fields that are blessed. But not only that, did you see, remember when we read it last week, right? Isaac then goes about and he redigs all of these wells that his father Abraham had built and dug. And the thing about it was that everybody there needed water. But only Isaac was willing to go and dig wells. And this is something that I think is really problematic in our culture today. There's a lot of people who complain about the need for water. but not a lot of people digging wells. I mean, that is just an example of something that, obviously we have water here. I mean, we're not actually talking about water. But think about the environment debate, about climate change. You may think climate change is legitimate. You may think climate change is a complete farce. I think we all could agree, though, that like we look around sometimes and we see our environment or our planet, is maybe getting a little dirty. We see trash by the roadside, things like that. It's easy to complain about garbage. Different than to just pick some up. You ever go to the grocery store? Just sit in your car for 2 minutes at the grocery store and see how many people take in a cart themselves. They'll complain that there's no cart inside. Well, long before they would think to just grab a cart from the rack right by where they parked and push the car in. In fact, studies have shown that that is one thing that people talk about, that even colleges have said is a universally good thing for people to do. You know why? Because it costs you very, very little, and there's immediate return, right? It's not like you have to go and invade the beaches of Normandy to do a good thing. All you have to do is just grab an empty cart and push it in. But you see, this thing speaks to a lot about what goes on in our culture today. You don't like the environment? Okay, what are you doing to clean up the environment? Well, I complain about it every day. Well, maybe there are better uses of time. Maybe. But Christians do this too, myself included. As I was thinking about this week and praying about it, what I came to realize is I bemoan the state of our culture a lot. But I don't witness like I should. You see, it's easy to complain about something. It's difficult to do something about it. Isaac was not the sort of person to just sit around and bemoan the fact that there wasn't water. He went out and dug wells. Then, sadly, the wells were stolen from him by lesser men. So what did he do? Well, he just sat around and complained about it and said, well, those jerks just came and took my well. No, what did he do? He went and dug another well. And that second well was stolen from him by lesser men. Men who had spent so much time complaining about the lack of water. Then, he goes on and builds another well. You see, this is a big thing about our culture today, is that sadly, I think there are fewer and fewer doers in the world, and more complainers in the world. And complaining has never solved anything. And I should know I'm the captain of that team. But not only that, we see that Jacob begins to learn the importance of not taking things from others that have been given, but instead earning what is his by his own labor. Genesis chapter 30, verse number 25. Genesis 30, verse number 25. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, send me away, that I may go into mine own place, into my country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go. For thou knowest my service which I have done. We'll pause here for just a second. Understand in verse 26, he's not asking for a gift. He's saying, I have served you for my wives. Now I am expecting my payment. So he's not asking for a gift. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. And he said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it. So he says, what do you want? And Jacob says, and he said unto him, thou knowest how I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little when thou hadst before I came, and it is now increased unto a multitude, and the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now when shall I provide for mine own house also? So he asks now the first responsible question that Jacob has really asked in his whole life. How will I provide for someone else? Everything else in Jacob's life has been give to me, give to me, give to me. And now he's saying, how can I provide for someone else if I keep providing for you? It's essentially what Jacob's saying. And he said, what shall I give thee? And this is something I think that is one of the most transformative sentences in all of Jacob's life. And Jacob said, thou shalt not give me anything. If thou wilt do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep thy flock. Now he goes on to explain this system by which basically he says, I will continue to work for your flocks. And all I ask are the parts of your flock that you don't want. The ones that are marred or have certain blemishes and things like that. I will take those things. But I will continue to work for you. You see, Jacob, I point all this out because last week it may seem like I'm really being hard on Jacob, but the reality is we have to get a good understanding of where Jacob is in his life to begin to see the transformation that takes place in his life. And here is a turning point in Jacob's life. Go to Genesis chapter 31. Genesis chapter 31. Verse number 1, and he heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and that which our father's hath he gotten with all his glory. Now, here again, it's interesting how similar these things are to our culture. People now see somebody who's successful, and instead of saying, what did they do to be successful? Maybe I should do that. They condemn that person for their success. That's precisely what they do here for Jacob. Because if we were to study this, and we won't because we're not focusing on Laban's sons, but Laban's sons did nothing to help Laban. They were just like the men sitting around desiring that there was more wells while not digging any. They lived off of the excess of Jacob's hard work. And then they got mad that Jacob was beginning to be blessed and Laban was not. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. Why is this? Because Laban loved Jacob while Laban profited from Jacob. When Laban stopped profiting from Jacob, suddenly he loved Jacob a little bit less. It says in verse number 3, and the Lord said unto Jacob, return to the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock, and said unto them, I see your father's countenance, and it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father hath been with me. And ye know that with all my power I have served your father. And your father hath deceived me and changed my wages, what? 10 times. So Jacob reaps tenfold the sin that he commits in his own life, the trickery and deception in his own life. It says, but God suffered him not to hurt me. Again, interesting, that's another really transformative sentence in Jacob's life. Because in our world today, what would our people say? This thing has hurt me deeply. What does Jacob say? Yeah, he's cheated me, he's lied to me, and he's tricked me 10 times. But God has suffered him not to hurt me. See, Jacob is saying, all this stuff that Laban did, it has not hurt me. Isn't that interesting how contradictory it is in our world today, which walks around basically like Girl Scout badges on an apron of pains and things that have gone wrong in our lives, that we're all looking to see who's got the most prolific set of pain badges, right? Not Jacob. So verse number 8 says, and he said thus, the speckled shall be thy wages, then all the cattle bear speckled. And if he said thus, the ring straight be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ring straight. Then God hath taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up mine eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring straight, speckled, and grizzled. It's interesting to note here, for those of you, you may be kind of weirded out by this, but all this means is that God told him which groups, rams, would be sexually active in a given time period. You see, God didn't work a miracle. What he did was he just gave Jacob insider information. Yeah. Said, the ones that are ring straight, these rams are going to be sexually active during this time. Place your chips on them. That's it. We think, oh, well, God did this and this. No, again, God did not circumvent the whole process of work and effort. He just gave Jacob and said, this is what's going to happen. And the angel of God spake to me in a dream, saying, Jacob, and I said, here am I. And he said, lift up now thine eyes and see, all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ring straight, speckled, and grizzled, for I have seen all that Laban doeth unto thee. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us and hath quite devoured also our money. Again, isn't it interesting to know that Laban then goes from a man who had worked, and then basically Jacob does all of his work for him. And what does Laban become? A man who does nothing but consume. And Laban consumes everything that Jacob had worked for and had blessed Laban's life. It's also interesting to note in this that God answers Jacob's prayer but not in the way Jacob prayed it. When Jacob prayed before, Jacob said, God, if you'll give me food, if you'll give me raiment, and if you'll bring me back in peace into my father's house, then you'll be my God. When he says there, I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest, he's talking about the prayer Jacob made there. That was the prayer at Bethel. Notice that God answers Jacob's prayer, but not in the way that Jacob prayed. What Jacob asked for was that God would just bless him. Just magically turn the spigots on and his pockets would be full and everything would be great. And God says, no, I'll bless your work. I'll bless your effort. I'll bless what you bring to me. And so God does fulfill Jacob's prayer, but not in the way Jacob had asked. Look down in the same chapter, Genesis chapter 31, because it's important to understand exactly the situation that Jacob found himself in. Genesis 31, verse number 36. It says, and Jacob was wroth and chose with Laban and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that thou hast so hotly pursued after me? Now, we don't go into this for the sake of time, but you find that basically Jacob recognizes that he's never going to willingly get out from underneath Laban's thumb. So he takes what's his, what he has earned, according to Laban's rules. He packs up and leaves. Laban comes after him and follows him as though he were a thief. It says in verse 37, whereas thou hast searched all my stuff, what hast thou found of all thy household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and thy brethren, that thou may judge betwixt us both. What's Jacob saying here? His whole life, Jacob has been a thief. And for the first time in Jacob's life, Jacob can say, search me, because I have stolen nothing from you. And that is something that is the answer of an honest man. Search me, because I have stolen nothing from you. That is the answer of an honest man. Now, I'm not talking about, in terms of like government and government overreach and police. Not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, though, in our heart, a man who is honest can say, go ahead, look at my phone and see what I've looked at. Go ahead, look at my computer, see what I've looked at.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead, ask my coworkers if I've had, lunches with women that aren't my spouse. I'd say that from my perspective, right? Go ahead. That is the answer of an honest man. Verse number 38, these 20 years have I been with thee. Thy ewes, thy she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of thy flocks have I not eaten. That which was torn of beasts I brought not unto thee. I bear the loss of it. Of my hand didst thou require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Thus was I in the day, drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. You see what Jacob says there? A couple things. First of all, he says, basically, I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 20 years. It's a long time. That's a long haul. And then he says, not only that, though, but if anything was lost of your flock, I paid for that myself out of my own wages. That is what Jacob describes. And so Jacob describes the situation and the work of his hands these past 20 years. And here is the truth that is nestled in this passage, is that despite the fact that the rules were stacked against Jacob, despite the fact that the situation wasn't perfect for Jacob, despite all of these things, here is the biblical principle. We are better for having overcome. Jacob was a much stronger man for having overcome the adversities in his life.
Yes.
But notice that even still, Jacob has not yet surrendered to the call of the Lord and made the God of Abraham and Isaac his own. Look at that in verse number 42. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac, have been with me. Surely thou hadst sent me away now empty. God hath seen my affliction in the labor of my hands and rebuked thee yesternight. See, even still, Jacob does not call God his God. It's still the God of his father and his grandfather. And so we get to the end of Jacob's life. We'll skip some of the things, but after his repentance and salvation, after he wrestles with the angel, one of the first things that Jacob does in his life, after he has cleaned up his character, is he begins to clean up his spiritual life. Go to Genesis chapter 35. Genesis 35. Genesis 35, verse number 1. And God said unto Jacob, Arise, and go up to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God, that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. Then Jacob said unto his household, and to all that were with him, Put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments. And let us arise, and go up to Bethel, and I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went. And they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods that were in their hand, and all their earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was by Shechem. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were round about them, and they did not pursue after the sons of Jacob. And so we see this passage here that one of the first things Jacob does after his salvation is he gets his house, his spiritual house, in order. And he says, I've made this decision, and as head of this house, this is the God we're going to follow, the God of Abraham and Isaac, my father and grandfather, and we're going to get rid of all of this other stuff. And so Jacob cleans up his spiritual life. Later in life, we'll see this snapshot, we'll see this image of Jacob communing with God. Go to Genesis chapter 46. Genesis chapter 46. As Jacob is called to return back to Egypt to meet with Joseph, Jacob gets this vision from God. Jacob is an old man at this point. Many years have passed since his conversion and then his spiritual cleansing at Bethel. And in Genesis chapter 46, verse number 1, and Israel, which is Jacob's name after his conversion, took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices unto God of his father, unto the God of his father Isaac. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. And Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And so Jacob makes this, or Israel makes this journey back down to Egypt, and we see here how close his relationship has grown with his Savior, God. That while on the way, Jacob lays his head down at night, and God speaks to him and says, listen, don't be afraid to go to Egypt, and you're going to see your son there, and he's going to place his hand over your eyes, and everything will be well. See, the point of all this is that when we started this lesson today, we talked about how Jacob was really at the low part of his arc and his story. And now we see Jacob is kind of on the rise. And it's telling how his relationship has changed from one that was very contentious with God to one that was very close and communal. And then we see the thing that he is referenced for in Hebrews in Genesis chapter 48. Genesis chapter 48. This is at the very end of Jacob's life. Genesis chapter 48, verse number 11. It says, And Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. So he's saying here, I had just hoped to see you. But not only do I get to see you, I get to see your children as well. And he says, Joseph brought them out from between his knees. It tells you a little bit about how young the boys were. And he bowed himself with his face to the earth, and Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. Verse 13 is giving you a picture of how one is facing the other, and you'll see here in just a moment what he expects is, or what Joseph expects is that Jacob will bless the older one first and then the younger. It says in verse number 14, And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head. What that means is that he was supposed to reach his hand straight forward, and instead he reaches across to the head of this boy, and then across to this boy. Okay? That's all that's telling you. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which what? Redeemed me from all evil. That angel was Christ. It says, Bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hands to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said unto his father, I'm sorry. I lost my place. There it is. Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. And he also shall become a people, and he shall also be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. The point of all this is that if we look over in verse number 10, we see now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them. So he's kissing his grandsons, is what it's saying there. But he can't see. And notice, understand in verse number 19, and his father refused and said, I know it, my son. You see, God had communed with Jacob so much that Jacob knew which one was which without being able to see them. And Jacob had blessed the one that he had decided he was going to bless. Now, I won't go into all the deeper meanings of this, but the point of all this is that Jacob makes this ceremony to adopt Manasseh and Ephraim into his own house as though they were his own children. This is a very big deal what Jacob does. And what he does is, knowing that this blessing must pass along, he's basically saying, listen, these boys are really of half Egyptian heritage. And so I'm going to bring them into my home, my household, as though they were directly my blood, so that God's blessings would encapsulate them too. This is a very powerful thing that Jacob does, all through faith. And that faith had grown over Jacob's life. Jacob displays the faith to end his life well, regardless of how it began. Jacob is a biblical example of showing how it's not about either environment nor heritage that defines who we are. Consider it. Because Jacob was of the chosen seed of Abraham. He had spiritual heritage from his grandfather, from his father. He was wealthy. He was the chosen race. And yet still, he chose to cast all that stuff aside early on in life and live life away from God. But Jacob shows that it's not how we begin something that matters, not nearly so much as how we end something. Go to Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse number 8. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. The Bible's telling us here that it doesn't matter how well you start out on something. I mean, a great start is good, for sure. But what really matters is how you finish something. In a marriage sense, that means it doesn't really matter how you behave on your wedding day or on your honeymoon, but years later, decades later. That's what really matters. How you end your marriage is much more important than how you begin it. It's not the start of a diet or an exercise routine that matters, but the day in and day out over the long haul that matters. I mean, you're not the only person who says, okay, I'm going to do this, and you do it one day, great, and then the next day, not so much. Why? Because the start of a thing doesn't matter nearly so much as the end of a thing. But Jacob is not the only example of a person who finished well. For the sake of myself, I'm going to go to Ruth chapter 4. I know I've talked about this on many occasions, but it is one of my favorite stories. And so every chance I get, I do tend to go back to there. Ruth chapter 4, verse number 13. It says, So Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And when he went unto her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. And the woman said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. And Naomi took the child and laid it to her bosom, and became nurse unto it. And the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, There is a son born to Naomi. See, it's not born to Naomi, but it's saying that it gave Naomi new life. And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. See, I love this story because Naomi's is one also of incredible transition. She starts out high, She goes very low, and then she ends high. Because it's Naomi's choices that matter, not all the other stuff in her life, all the other things or the other excuses or whatever. Lastly, go to 2 Timothy chapter 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4. I love the story of Naomi because what it really teaches us is that no matter where we are in life, no matter how old we are, God has something for us to do. No matter what our physical capabilities are, no matter what our mental capabilities are, God has something for us to do. Naomi was at the end of her life, and she could easily say, I've raised sons. I don't need to do this again. I don't need all this trouble. But she said, no, I'm going to throw my life into this child, and it will restore my life as a result. It's a beautiful story, how Naomi's life turns around through Ruth and Boaz's actions. It also is something that I think is very telling, and is something that is a real warning sign for our culture, is the value of the elderly in the lives of the young.
Amen.
Not everybody has grandparents growing up around them and things like that. I get that. Some folks don't live near family and things like that. But, I highly recommend if you have young children that you put them in the path of older folks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's good for the older folks and it's good for your kids. It really is. I'll say this, she's not in here, but Cheryl has raised 3 kids. All 3 of those kids don't live near here. She doesn't see her grandchildren very much. And yet she is a grandmother to many kids in this church.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? She is not a lady who says, well, I raised my kids are all gone. She throws herself into the lives of other kids, and those kids are better for it.
Yeah.
Paul is another one who finishes his life well. Look at 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse number 7. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but unto all them that love his appearing. See, one of the big differences between Paul and the modern day person is that Paul says, no matter what, I'm going to finish my course, and I'm going to finish it well. The modern person, though, says, well, the race is stacked against me, so why even try?
That's right.
Well, let's say, I'm not going to win, so why should I try? I see this a lot with young men in our youth group today. I'll joke around with them from time to time, but I'm always concerned, especially I'll do this at Backyard Bible Club. We'll do a game or something, and I'll always be surprised at how many young men won't participate in the game out of fear of losing. I joke with them, and I don't mean this to be critical, but it's not a good character quality. It's not. To only get involved in the things you think you'll win is going to really cut down on the things that you'll experience in life.
That's right. Yeah.
It's much better to be like, yeah, I tried. Boy, did I stink that up. I come to find out that game is not for me, But it's better than just being like, well, yeah, I lost because I wasn't really trying anyway. One is an aspect of masculinity. It is to say, yeah, I got in the ring and I got myself beat.
Yeah.
Another is to say, I didn't even bother trying because I couldn't win. You see, that is the thing that our culture faces and deals with a lot, and I feel like it's creeping more and more into Christian churches and homes, is this idea that, well, if the race is stacked against me, why should I even try? That is the same thing as complaining about the lack of water while not digging wells. Listen, you can dig a well. Whatever that well is in life, you can dig it. You can. Complaining about a lack of water doesn't help. Paul said, I set out on this course without knowing if I would win or not. But I decided to get in the fight anyway, and I tried. And Paul finishes his life well. Jacob is a great story in the sense that Jacob turns his life around through the result of his choices and finishes his life much better than he started it. And so with that, we'll be dismissed. Father, we thank you for this day, all the many blessings that you've given us. I pray that you be with us this hour, Lord. I pray that you'd open our hearts for the